Hello, and thank you for coming. And thank you to Francisco and Patricia for inviting me. So we're going to be talking about building game franchises and IPs. So I'm Christian Fonnesbech. I'm founder and head of IP at Leverage. And we're basically a consultancy that helps game studios and publishers to build lasting franchises, but also to look at the IP as something that's important from the first time you launch a game. We've been doing this for about 7-8 years now. I think we've done 40 or 50 projects directly with studios and publishers. And we've worked with everything, mainly lots of indies, lots of AA's, also AAA's like Bandai Namco and PlayOn and so on. And then for the last 2 years, we've worked with a lot of accelerators. So we've worked with Interactive Ontario in Canada and Press Start in Germany. I think I've personally mentored over 90 startups in the last 2 years just on building IPs and brands. And then finally, we started working with Story Kitchen in Hollywood. They are the producers of the Sonic movies and Lara Croft animated on Netflix. So we've really tried everything from small game startups to large franchises to, game IPs moving to Hollywood. And this is the team. I'm usually the first guy in, working with the team, working with the IP, and then I bring in the others as they are needed. And the question we often get, and the place it always starts, is where does the game stop and where does the IP start? What's the difference between the two? And I like to use IO Interactive as an example. They're based here in Copenhagen. They just put out the James Bond game. That was theirs. But they actually sold the company, I think, originally 10 years ago. And before that, they had built it up from nothing. They had 200 employees. The Hitman was their first game, but they made 4 different series of games. But when they sold the company, the rights to that one character was 65% of the value of the entire company. So think about that. We're talking about IPs. That means intellectual property. That character was an intellectual property that was worth more than 200 expert employees, 4 different game series, etc., etc. So this is just a part of why the franchises are important. Not only are they easy to recognize and easy to buy, but they build value over time. And I think the core message for me is that today, it's not enough that you make a good game. You also have to have the emotions. You also have to be able to ask, will it stand out in the market? And not just gameplay-wise, but also emotionally. So does it look like all the other zombie games? Does it look like all the other pirate games? That's just as important as good gameplay. The second is that whether it will engage emotionally. So will people actually care? Will they remember? Will they want to come back? Will they be frightened or excited or romantically interested? And then finally, what if it works? What if you sell 100,000 units or 1 million units? Will there actually be anything to own? Because if you've made a game about triangles, then you can't protect it in a court of law. There's too many triangles in the world. So the idea that the character of the Hitman is an intellectual property that you can protect in a court of law is very important. And by the time you've sold 1 million units, it's too late. You can't change it. So based on all these hundreds of projects that we've been through, the easy way we found to communicate how do you build an IP is actually to go through the big mistakes we see people make when they're making their games. So I'm going to count down from number 10. It's going to take about half an hour, and then we can move into the Q&A. So common mistake number 10 that we've seen is that game developers and even publishers really underestimate the need to stand out and the need to build long-term value. So if you're a game developer, the world tends to look like this, right? You have an idea, you're just putting all your resources, all your power into making a good game. The problem is that once you get close to launch, you realize, as I said, it's not enough that it's a good game. It also has to stand out in the market. And there's 20,000 new games a year now on Steam alone. So when people are looking into that enormous catalog of games, does it stand out? Is it different? Have I seen it before? And then even if you do get past that, then you've got this challenge that now you've got 10 employees or 20 employees, and you love them and you're a good team, but how are you going to keep them employed? And making a one-hit game is difficult. Making two-hit games is almost impossible. I know it happens, but it's very rare. So the biggest and safest thing you can actually do is that the first game becomes a franchise. It becomes a lasting property that can become more games and that the fans can come back to again and again. The problem is, of course, that to get from good game to standing out and launch and building a franchise, you need a few more things. And this is really what we're talking about today, which is what do you need to do, or which mistakes can you make on the way to trying to stand out in the market and building a lasting franchise. And after I think we've been doing this for 2 years, we realized that one of the fundamental problems in the games industry, or challenges, is that we don't do pre-production on the IP or the brand. So game developers will usually do pre-production on the gameplay and on the technology and things like that. But this stuff with the characters and the emotions and the world and the brand, we don't really want to think about that. So game development is typically 3 years of game development, and then it's 3 months of IP and brand panic at the end. And that's when you realize that you've made a game that has great gameplay, but it looks exactly like Pirates of the Caribbean. Or it has great gameplay and it looks like all the other zombie games. And then you don't stand out. And then it's too late to change because you've got no more time and no more money. So the cost is actually quite high. If you only optimize your mechanics and not the emotional attachment, then number one, it leads to a lot of expensive rework when you're in that panic phase and you're trying to make the character different and you're trying to stand out as a brand. Secondly, it often leads to you can't stand out because you can't promise something on your Steam page that's not in the game. So you end up not being different. And then finally, even if you do survive, then because you don't have that IP, then you can't build the franchise value. And we'll talk more about that later. So if you only take one thing away today, it's that I strongly advise you to prototype not just the gameplay mechanics, but also the emotional IP, the characters, the emotional journey, the world building, and also the brand. So what are you going to promise on your Steam page or on your PlayStation Store page? What is it you're going to promise that people are going to say, hey, I want to pay $10, $20, $40 for that? Because if you promise it, it has to be in the game, right? So the earlier you can start prototyping both the game and the emotions and the brand, the longer they can grow together and the stronger you can be when you get to launch. Common mistake number 9 that we've seen, and we see this in all sizes of companies, is that our industry tends to underestimate the team culture and the power of the team culture. So I like to think of it as a sliding scale, right? Out here on the far left, we've got artistic team culture. We want to make art. We want to innovate. We want to express ourselves. We want to make something that's never been seen before. And then all the way out on the other side, we've got it's all business, right? We're just optimizing for the money. Let's just make something that the players will love. We don't care about anything else. But of course, this is a sliding scale, and you can be all the way out on one side, or you can be in the middle, and so on. But you have to be mindful of this. You have to be mindful of the culture in your team because it's difficult to change. And the point is, of course, if you recruited your team on the promise that, hey, we're going to be artists, we're going to do whatever we feel like every day, then beginning to talk about a franchise, that's moving you to the right? You're moving to more business, a little bit less art, more business. And if you're started your team on pure business, we're only here for the money, and now you want to make a franchise, then that actually means you have to move to the left, because now you have to start bringing in the emotion. So why even bother? Well, if you look at games like Hades, the first game took 11 months to sell 1.3 million units. The second game did it in 25 days. So this just illustrates one of the reasons why I suggest that having a franchise is a great way to run a game company. It's because the second game you have doesn't have to, build trust. It already has the trust that the first game generated. So it becomes much easier to build value on the second and third and fourth and so on. And what that also means for your company is that the value of your franchise is compounding, right? So the more releases, the more time people have spent with those characters, the more valuable your franchise and your company becomes. So there's some really good financial arguments for having a franchise. But if you recruited your team on, we will never tell you what to do, we're never going to talk about money, it's just art, then you're going to have a challenge. And I strongly suggest that you think about the change that this requires. If you're moving from pure art to thinking more about business, then you are changing the culture in your team, and the team needs to come along. And we've seen a few cases where this happened, right? We've seen a few cases where the management would really like there to be more business because it's tough to get the money in. And then they just stood up in front of the employees and said, we're going to make a franchise. And this is the reaction they got, right? Because the team culture was artistic. So what I'm telling you is if the idea of building a franchise and building a valuable IP is new to your team, you need to introduce it slowly. You need to talk to them. You need to make sure they want it, because otherwise, this is not a good way to work. Common mistake number 8 that we see is making games about things. So I assume you have a great project. I assume you have great gameplay. The next question becomes, are you creating a lasting emotional relationship with the audience? Are you building something that people love and that they want to experience again? And the simple truth about emotions is that we don't get very emotional about things. We don't get super emotional about spaceships or magic swords or gold or so on. What we get emotional about is characters. So if you look at even the most expensive, beautiful fantasy worlds ever made, what's on the posters? It's the characters. And if you look at all the big game franchises, they're also fronted by characters. And of course, there's simple reasons for that. We recognize, we're human beings, we recognize other creatures that feel, and we know that feeling, and that's a great way to connect. It's also something you can own in a court of law, which is not bad. But I think sometimes that the state of the art for computer game characters is a little bit where the comic books were 50 years ago, which is that they're really cool costumes, but they're actually almost like lists of features. So back in the day, Iron Man was cool because he could fly and he could shoot, energy out of his hands. Spider-Man was cool because he could climb walls and tell jokes and so on and so on. So they really kind of were cool costumes that had lists of features. But when the Marvel Cinematic Universe made their superheroes really popular, suddenly they were very emotional. Suddenly they were relatable. Suddenly Iron Man was all about having daddy issues. It took him 22 movies to get a hug from his father. What's her name? Black Widow was an orphan and so on and so on. Suddenly the human qualities became important. And I think this is what's happening to computer game characters now. It's that the human qualities are becoming much more important. And if you want to have a valuable franchise, then having those human qualities in your characters is becoming more and more important. And to do that, you need to a little bit avoid mistake number 7, which is having the story world come in too late. So we actually saw this from one of our clients at one point, which is that we're going to do the story world characters, and that we'll do that once the gameplay has got traction. So we're going to do a game with no story and no characters and no world, and then we're going to see if it gets popular. And if it gets popular, then we'll put those things in. But I think that's a spectacularly bad idea. Because, as I said, there's 20,000 new games a year on Steam now. You're not going to stand out because you have a better crafting system. You're not going to stand out because, your progression loop is different, a little bit different than the one in Hades. You're going to stand out because your character is interesting and wants interesting things. And then the gameplay will make it fun to play with that character or play in that world. And to get to that, we really have to, I think, change this hierarchy a little bit, because for many years, gameplay has been the only thing. And all this story world stuff, characters and so on, that's not so important. I think we have to make these two equally important. But to do that, you have to understand them both. So, we all understand gameplay genre. We know what an RTS is. We know what a first-person shooter game is and so on. But not too many people in the games industry understand story world genre. So what is a Western? What is a gangster story? What is a romance? What has to happen for people to be satisfied about being part of one of these, a Western or a romance and so on? And I can illustrate it with 2 words. This movie has not been made. I'll add 2 words to it and you won't like it anymore. You see? So that's not what we expect from a gangster story. So my point is that it's too late to wait with the IP until the end. At the beginning, when you're prototyping your gameplay, you should also be prototyping your world, your characters, your emotions, and so on, because it's equally important at the end. Common mistake number 6 we see is not having an iconic character. And the thing about characters is I know that not all games have characters in them, but, there are various ways to get around that. But when you do think about the characters, it's just important to say that your character needs to be fresh. She needs to be unique. She needs to stand out in the market. She needs to be emotionally interesting. So if you look at these, 9 female heroines from computer games, they're extremely different, right? There's only one Asian parkour punk. There's only one professional psychic. There's only one insane pick girl. And the point is really that if you are making a character, that character needs to stand out in the market for characters. So the tentpole character is actually a pretty important job. It's not something that you can just, we'll do it in the weekend. We need to understand that, the visual design needs to be unique, but also the goals and attitudes and relationships of the character need to be interesting and emotionally engaging. It doesn't have to be an enormous job. It doesn't have to be a huge Lara Croft 3D model with thousands of polygons and so on. It can be super simple, but it needs to stand out and it needs to have a clear, iconic design that you can own. And the emotions together with the design need to be special. They need to be ownable. Common mistake number 5 is not really thinking too much about the world and just recycling it. Games are great at worlds, but I work with a lot of different game development companies, and I see this 2 times a week, right? It's another Tolkien Middle-earth copy. It's almost as, Tolkien is everywhere. So as soon as you say fantasy, there's a tendency for people to think, oh, it's got to have elves, it's got to have orcs, it's got to have lost forests and dragons and stuff. But the thing is, just like with the characters, you need to stand out with your world. If you're making a desert world, it had better be very different from Dune. If you're making a I don't know, mechanized infantry universe, it had better be very, very different from Warhammer 40k, because they own those spaces in the market. And you need to think about how your world will be different. Common mistake number 4 we see is not having ongoing tension. So ongoing tension means there's something more, right? Will the boy get the girl? Will the evil villain destroy the world? Will the ring be destroyed? And so on. And my point here is, if your story world ends in game 1, there's really no point in coming back for game 2, right? So if you're thinking about building a franchise, you need to have this ongoing tension that continues beyond the first game. So if you think about story worlds as a series of questions, I said, will the boy get the girl? Will the villain destroy the world? Will the ring of Sauron be destroyed? And so on. Then each of these arcs in this story here is like a question. And when it's answered, that story is over. So if you think of The Lord of the Rings, then the big purple arc there, that's one big question, is really, will the ring be destroyed? And when we get to the end of book 3, yes, the ring is destroyed and the story is over. And this is why I think the Lord of the Rings franchise has been in trouble for a long time, because honestly, the ring has been destroyed. Why should we watch anymore? And it's kind of the same with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You know, Thanos found the Infinity Stones, the story is over. They've been trying to do different things afterwards, but who cares? The story is over. So I've had a lot of consulting jobs, for example, where in game 1, they're making a new game and it's a buddy story. There's the player character and they have a sidekick and they argue and eventually they become friends and then one of them dies. It's a good story, but your franchise is over. No, we'll find a new sidekick in game 2. No, I'm sorry. That's not how it works. People are in love with these 2 characters. They have to keep going. There has to be an ongoing arc if you're going to build a franchise. So it doesn't have to be a relationship. It doesn't have to be a ring. It can be many things. But the world and the characters must go on. Common mistake number 3, and a lot of these questions are treated or come down to this one, actually. Common mistake number 3 is that we have a tendency in our industry to treat writers like typists. And by that, I mean that, you know, writing is not the same as typing. Typing is when you hit the keys on your keyboard and letters come out. Writing is when you understand characters, you understand world building, you understand tension arcs and subplots and all these things. Even if you're not making a linear game, even if you're making a sandbox, what's going to make it emotionally work for me? What's going to make the characters interesting? Why is the world there? All of this is about writing. And I think the problem comes from our industry being originally mainly about technology and then about gameplay. But today it is also about writing. And I think the problem is often that the management in a game studio don't understand how writers work. So the writers are not really getting qualified feedback. So this is one of the points here, is that writing is just as complicated as coding. And, you know, it's difficult to manage a coder if you don't understand coding. It's also difficult to manage a writer if you don't understand writing. And I think, you know, a story world is a bit like an engine where all the different cogs and pieces fit together. And when they work, the engine starts and it can run and it really works. And the problem is, if, you know, we've seen a few times, every Monday morning, the head of combat comes in and pulls something out and says, let's put something else in here because I saw something cool on TV last night. If that happens every week for months, you can be really sure that the engine will not start. And the point is that the head of combat owns 25% of the company and the writer doesn't own anything because she came in late. So I'm just saying that if you want to build an emotionally strong franchise, once again, bring in the writers early. Common mistake number 2 that we see is leaving the brand design too late. So brand design, well, the brand is your key visual, the Steam capsule image, what you write on your Steam page, how you make your trailer, what are you promising the audience? And it's actually quite a small part of your budget, right? And I think this is also one of the reasons people just push it. It's a small thing, we'll do it at the end. But of course, it's the first thing anybody sees. So it has an enormous influence on how people think about your game and whether they will click on it and whether they will buy it. And the point here is that the brand does two things. Number one, it promises, right? When you go to a Steam page or a PlayStation store page, you're being promised something. If you give us your money, we promise you this experience. That's what the brand does. And the second thing it does is it positions you. So you're basically saying, this is a zombie game, but it's different like this. Or this is an RTS, but it's different from the other RTSs like this. So you're both promising something and you're positioning the game. And this is why I say it's important that not only are you prototyping the gameplay early, you're also prototyping the IP early, and you should actually be prototyping your brand early. Because by prototyping your brand, you're actually able to compare to what the others are doing. So if you're making an RTS pirate game, you should be looking at the brands of other RTSs and other pirate games. And you should be looking at, are we close enough to them so that people who like this sort of thing will like us? And do we stand out enough that we have something to offer that they don't? The sooner you can start to work like that, going back and forth between your gameplay and your IP and your brand, the sooner these things can grow together and build something unique. So when you do it right, the brand is strategy informed. You want to position yourself in a specific place. You are making it creatively impactful so it stands out and so on. And of course, if you can afford it, it's best to bring in specialists. But even doing it internally will strengthen the whole game. When it works, the key visuals are amplifying both the gameplay, the feeling, the IP, the characters, the emotions that we're promising. They're attracting the kind of people who you think will find this game attractive and fun. It can communicate a lot right away, right? This is the main characters, it's the gameplay loop, it's the combat, it's the setting, it's all in one image. You need to stand out in the market. That's super important. 20,000 games a year. And it needs to be consistent. So your logo, your key visuals and so on need to be consistent across the launch period of the game, but also across different media. And the simple reason for that is that people only remember things they've seen 9 times. So if you keep changing the brand, you keep resetting the counter. And when it works, you can own a position in the market. And that's really what you want. You want to own a position in the market because that's where the value is ongoing. And that's where the fans come back to. You think of Hitman, you think of Lara Croft, you think of Monopoly. They own a position in the market. And if you don't, then you're really competing on features. And, we've got a better crafting system. We have a horse that comes quickly. It's not enough anymore. There's just too much out there. Finally, the common mistake number 1 that we see, it's probably not what you think. It's having nothing to say. Your game and your story world needs purpose. And this goes back to art, right? This goes back to why we got into making games in the first place. We want to make something that wasn't there before. We want to express ourselves. There has to be some meaning in it. And all the big franchises are about something. They have a heart. There's something. Lara Croft is always looking for her father in the ruins. There's the sorrow. There's the exploration and so on. Think of Batman. Think of Link and so on. And it also makes financial good sense because if you don't have a clear vision of what you're trying to say, there is a tendency that your game all the different elements will point in different directions. And that makes it really difficult to make a strong and impactful decision. So there we are, wrapping up. Simply put, a good game is a nice thing, but it's just not enough anymore. 20,000 new games a year, Roblox, all the rest. a good way to stand out and become memorable is to build the story world as well as the gameplay at the same time. And to aim to stand out at launch. And if you get that success, be able to build a lasting franchise. I think the evidence from what we see is that the clear way to avoid IP and brand panic is really to start that prototyping early. So you have a qualified conversation about the emotions you're building, along with the gameplay, along with the brand and how it's going to position you in the market. It won't enable you to predict a hit. Nobody can predict a hit. But it will enable you to work effectively or with intent to try to stand out, to try to connect emotionally, and to try to have something that can actually be protected in a court of law. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to ask everyone to please react using the clapping reaction.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think that it's a very enlightening presentation. And we have a first question. In fact, I would like to read it to you. And this comes from Valeria, and she asks, what about the concept? What about the concept and not the characters being the saga's continuation? That is, if the IP is based on a concept, not on characters. That is how I understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that the concept should continue. And I think for any franchise, the expectations of the fans are extremely important, right? If the concept changes too much, the fans will get angry because that's not what they came back for. They came back to get the same feeling again. So the concept is very, very important. The problem is that you cannot own a concept. So you can't protect it in a court of law. So Patricia, you're an attorney, right? So we have an attorney in the room. As far as I know, I'm not a lawyer, but you cannot own the idea of a zombie, the idea of a pirate. It's very, very difficult to own gameplay. You know, even Nintendo is having trouble defending gameplay in a court of law, and they have more money than God. And money is really good if you're going to court, right? But you can own a character. And you can protect it if it's unique enough and nobody else has done it. So I would imagine, Valeria, that the next question you're going to ask is, well, what if I don't have a character in the game? I would say, put one in there anyway. You know, you can do that in various ways. You can do it like Bloodborne. I don't know if you know Bloodborne. It's the best game ever made. If you don't know it, go play it. Everybody knows what the Bloodborne guy looks like. But he's not in the game. Nobody's character looks like that. So he's on the advertising, he's on the key art and so on. If you Google Bloodborne tattoo, you will see people have tattooed that character on their bodies all over the world because the emotion in the game is so strong. And we've seen that character on all the key art. That is the character that embodies the experience we get. But nobody's character looks like that. Or you could do what Monopoly does, which is they put the character in the logo. There are no characters in the Monopoly game at all. There's a hat and a car and things like that, but there's no characters. But everybody knows what that Monopoly guy looks like because he's in the logo. So you don't have to have a character. Of course you don't. But if you're making an IP, I would recommend it. Patricia, do you have a comment? Or?
Yeah, you were talking about not being able to defend a concept. So I was thinking and you said Nintendo, so it triggered my memories about, I don't know, Genshin Impact, which you could say is like a Breath of the Wild style game because it has very bright colors, it has cel shading, you have a character that can explore a very vast world and even climb. So it has like all these elements. But as you said, like Nintendo did not invent exploring, did not invent vast camps of villages or, I don't know, just trees, forests. So in we don't have this specific doctrine or legal concept in Mexico, but it's commonly used across the world, the scène affaire, which is in French. So excuse me if I really don't pronounce in French, but it's like all the elements that you need to have in a plot. Like if you are going to, you talk about zombies, like if you are developing a post-apocalyptic story, of course it will involve, I don't know, abandoned cities, deserts. If you use zombies, which has like a very interesting story, where did the concept of the zombie came from? You cannot own a zombie. So it's more or less the same thing if you're going to have like a plot or a narrative in a wizard world. Like, oh, this wizard uses, how do you say, a staff or a wand. Like, you cannot you cannot own those ideas. First of all, because they are not originated by you, but you don't have all these specific elements to protect the world. You can have a Gandalf or you can have a Harry Potter, but not all these elements that are commonly used on these settings or environments.
Yeah. And the character has to be quite specific to be ownable, right? I mean,
exactly. Like
I like this one. So this is the hitman, right? He's got 2 silver guns and he's bald and he's got a suit and he's got a barcode in the back of his head. If you do all those things, I promise you, IO Interactive will come after you, right?
Sure. And about what Valeria was asking about having, I don't know, like the concept, I was thinking more of the, I don't know, the world. I don't know, what do you think about this? If it's really a truthful statement from Nintendo or just like a PR trick. But when they launched Breath of the Wild, they were explaining why they have so little music when you were exploring out in the wild. Like you see in other worlds like the background music, and also in Zelda it's very characteristic, very famous music. But in Breath of the Wild you just hear noises, you hear the animals, and they were developing this idea about how they wanted you to think of Hyrule as another character or Hyrule as another entity being there in the game, which, I don't know, it would make sense with what you are talking about, having a distinctive character, you can have a wizard, a hitman, a spy, an explorer, but you need to have a specific features or characteristics that, first of all, is like differentiating from any other one. And I don't think, secondly, just making them relatable to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think you can sort of stack uniqueness, right? So you can have a unique character, and then you can have unique world elements, and then you can have a unique story world, and then you can have unique gameplay. And the more things you stack, the more, unique it becomes. But it's not everything you can own. Valeria, I'm wondering, is this what you are thinking about? Okay, Valeria can think about it, and then maybe we can look at José's.
Yes, the question is, what do you think would be the main point to start building a property? Think about an indie studio in Latin America. Like, what I think that he means, what would be the starting point?
Right.
How would you start building an IP?
Yeah, that's a great question. My impression is that it usually starts with the gameplay. The first thing is usually the gameplay. That's not necessarily the IP, but that is the core of the experience. We're making games after all. If the gameplay is not great, it's not going to be good. So the next point I would say to start with is the character, because it's the simplest thing you can own. If you think of Super Mario originally, is only, a little bunch of pixels. It's not a big, complicated thing. But he's ownable because he's original. And I would say that once you have the gameplay, you start thinking about the character. And that would be the point I would start at. You look at something like Shovel Knight, you know, it's not a complicated property. It's a blue knight with a shovel. But nobody else has made a blue knight with a shovel. So you have a unique element that you can own and protect in a court of law. Once you have gameplay and you have a character, then you can start thinking about what are the emotions we want to experience with this character and with this gameplay. And then it sort of can start to grow from there. And then you can also start thinking about, well, what kind of a world would this character live in, and so on. And it starts to build out. But I do think that, you know, you don't have to have everything, world, emotions, characters. But if you only have one thing, I would have the character. Thank you, Jose.
And well, I was thinking of a question like, how do you know, or when do you know that an IP is good or ready? Like in your experience, based on all the years that you've been working, but how do you know?
Well, what do you mean by good?
I don't know. That's the point. Like, I guess it depends on what you're looking for, right? Like, or what you want to have. But like,
yeah. But I would
how do you
say
know that something's ready?
So if we talk about the IP as, you know, character, world, brand, all these things, then I do think, you know, it needs to stand out. It needs to be different enough that I notice it. But it also needs to appeal to the people who like this sort of thing, right? So if you're making an IP that is, I don't know, fantasy, then it has to be enough like other fantasies that I recognize, oh, this is fantasy, because otherwise it won't attract the kind of players who like it. But then it has to stand out. It also has to be, oh, this is a new kind of fantasy. It's different from the other fantasies. And then we get to the point where we think, okay, can I relate to it? You know, relatability is a really good word for IPs. It means, can I recognize my own emotions in the story world? And we tend to think that everybody has all emotions, but I don't think that's true. You know, I think there's a small amount of emotions that everybody can relate to. And a lot of it is centered around family and romance. You know, if you start thinking about schizophrenia or, you know, being in trouble with the tax system or something like that, suddenly not everybody recognizes it. So you're making it less relatable. So if we start with, I need to be able to recognize it's a fantasy. Yes, it needs to be different. Yes, but it also needs to be relatable. It needs to be, I understand those emotions. I feel for that character. And if you look at some of the examples we've had here, like, you know, Hello Kitty, which is all about kindness, and, you know, Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, who is looking for her father. You know, she's lost her father. This is very human, very relatable emotions. But then, Francisco, finally, it needs to be ownable, right? It needs to be protectable in a court of law. Otherwise, it has no value. If anybody can copy it, I promise you they will. And with all the AI coming, it's just going to be easier to copy things. So having a unique IP that Patricio can come in and protect, and he can kill the people who have copied your IP, that's actually quite important. And the bottom line of the law is, if it's been done before, you don't own it. Right? So it needs to be original as well.
Which I think this is this anticipates the further question from Valeria, which she's saying, how can we come up with new stories or new things that goes out of the genres conventions? Or as you said before, like if it's been done before, it cannot be protected. And it really gets to a complex point, which might not be that complex. Like if you will develop a story about vengeance, of course, I don't know, since Edipo could be tracked any history about vengeance. So it's not about doing like unique story or the unique character. It just has to have like specific components about your story. You just showed to the hitman guy, like, of course, anything related to security, espionage, I don't know, police force, you can associate with people in black, right? But you told us this guy has 2 guns, like Lara Croft, and has a code bar in the neck. It's just a very tiny detail, but if you have a guy who has a code bar in the neck, it really helps. That's the only thing you need. You can develop and stack the story from there, but you just need to have the specific components, anything that will make it humanly relatable. You said we are now in big trouble with AI, but I don't know the people in the audience, but you can see a lot of flyers or a lot of graphic designs that you can just easily spot as AI made, that you just see them as like, it has a specific pattern, it has a specific things that you wouldn't come out personally or humanly, but now with all this AI slog, it just comes out your way. So it's not that you kill yourself or to squeeze your brain to bring the most eccentric, different idea. It's just have distinct idea or distinctive characters from where you can elaborate to.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I bring up the tentpole characters is if you have a unique tentpole character, you can tell a story that we've heard before. You will still own the character, right? So boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. That is literally every romance story ever told, except some of the times it's girl meets boy, girl loses boy, girl gets boy back. So, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. These stories have been told before. But if you're telling it with a bee who has blue wings, then you can own the bee and people will associate those emotions with that bee. You still have to make it a hit, but, you know, the character is the easiest thing to protect, I think. I just see that Valeria is asking an interesting question here. So actually 2. So the first question she's asking is, what about something like Goosebumps? So the thing is that Goosebumps is an anthology. So it's telling different stories in the same universe. And yes, you can absolutely own that because you own the name Goosebumps and people will come back for more of those stories. Traditionally, those have not been very successful franchises. There are a few of them, but if you think of the difference between Goosebumps and James Bond, you know, in James Bond, we have the same character coming back again and again. We're seeing new stories all the time. These are just stronger. And if you look at Goosebumps, the movies, they bring the same actors back again and again. So they aren't kind of trying to bring in, you know, that tentpole character idea. Jack Black is the bad guy, the writer in every movie and so on. So I worked with a few anthology companies and I worked with Dark Pictures from Supermassive, who have this horror anthology series. And their biggest problem was it was an anthology because it's just difficult to make people excited because they don't know what the next story is. Because it's going to be a new story every time. One of the secrets I think about franchises is that you come back for the same feeling again. And if you're making an anthology, you're kind of weakening that. It becomes a little bit less familiar. But that's just a theory. So the second question Valeria has here is, how do we find other types of stories without using some of the genre's conventions? And I would say there's really 2 approaches to this. One is make art. If you're making art, then you're not making a genre story, you're making a new kind of story. A genre story is a proven type of story that we know works. So if we say Western, okay, it's going to have horses. It's going to be in the American West. It's going to have guns and hats, and you're going to be fighting about the land and so on. It's proven that this type of stories work. That's why it's called a genre. It's the same with gameplay, right? RTS, that's a genre that's been proven to work. We know people will buy it. So if you're making art, you're not making genre. The problem is, of course, that art doesn't make money. If you're making art, you're not going to make any money. I'm sorry. That's how it is. There are exceptions, but there's not a very big chance that you will be one of those exceptions, because for every artist who makes money, there's 100,000 artists who make zero money. If you want to make money making games, you need to think in terms of genres, because that is what has been proven to work. So how do you make something new? You combine genres. So today, story worlds are actually combinations of genres. So if you look at something like The Last of Us, I think it's about 5 different genres, right? It's a zombie story. It's a family drama between a father and a daughter. It's a Western because they're going across the American West. Season 2 is a revenge story. And there's a queer romance in there as well, right? So what it's doing is it's satisfying all of these genres. So if you want to make something original, my suggestion is combine genres that have not been combined before in a way that we have not seen before. But use the genres, I would recommend, because it's very difficult to be commercially successful if you don't. Okay.
Fantastic. So here is one reflection by Valeria, which I think is very in tune with what you've mentioned. And she says, so in short, we do use genre conventions, but make small turns and add little characteristic to make it fresh. And in that regard, we then do need a character that carries the storyline to be able to make it bulletproof IP, because otherwise we would not be able to protect it. So basically...
Yeah, I would say I agree with the character part, but I don't think the small twists do it. I think you need to combine genres in ways that have not been combined before. If you think of, like I said, with The Last of Us and so on, we have not seen, we've seen plenty of zombie stories, but we have not seen zombie stories that were family dramas and Westerns and queer romances before. That was a new combination. And of course, it also has to be great. And they've got the temporal characters and Joel and Ellie and so on. So yeah, that is what I would recommend.
I don't know if Valeria's question or comments are leaning towards common elements or already explored concepts, but you mentioned in the first minutes of the presentation the game Hades, and you are talking right now about making art as the part of having a distinctive IP elements that could be protected. I think that game could be considered in the middle point of what you are exposing, like all these Greek mythology characters are not from the development studio, are not proprietary, but what they do have is the specific expression of Zagreus, of Hades, of all these characters, is their reinterpretation and this very distinctive way of portraying the Hades, the Tartarus, all the world. So that could be like the part which, could be used as an example for Valeria's concerns. Like, these are not original ideas. These are not like, this studio cannot own Zeus or any of the mythology characters, but they have their own interpretations, own characters, or their own personalities. Like, if you are playing the game, you interact with the gods or with the other characters, and they have very distinctive personalities. Even if you can find these characterizations in the mythology, they have a specific voice, a specific portrayal. So that part is unique to the studio who made the game. Those artistic expressions are the ones that are protectable.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, and I think Hades is a great example also of making it relatable. Because it's a family drama, right? He's slowly discovering why his family is so fucked up. They're all gods, but
it's like a
arguing.
typical Hollywood movie.
Yeah. But I do think that they made one big mistake IP-wise, which is that they changed the main character in game 2. I don't think that was the right thing to do. I think artistically, I understand it. I understand they want to explore a female point of view. They wanted to try something else. But they had a chance to make Zacharias into the next James Bond. And they changed the main character. I think from a franchise point of view, that was not the best thing to do.
Interesting take.
But on the other hand, I don't have to sit there for 5 years working with Zacharias again. So I understand that, maybe the studio wanted to try something else, but if I was their economic advisor, so, what are you going to do in game 3? Are you going to bring in another one? Then it's an anthology again, right?
A cooperative game using the two characters.
It'll be interesting to see what they do, if they do.
Perfect.
Okay, so there was one question in Spanish. I didn't understand it. Have we had that one?
Oh no, I made a comment in Spanish that they could ask questions if we wanted to, but I suppose
that was you. Okay, great.
Yes, I suppose that.
Not a question.
But I don't know if there is any other question. Anyone would like to raise their hands or write down if you have any extra question. Yes, I believe everyone.
Well, I mean, if we only have 6 or 7 people in the room, I would not expect there to be any more questions. If we have 30 people, then it lasts for an hour. But it doesn't.
And Christian, I don't know if this generates any kind of payment, which Paco will cover, but I will. I'm very curious about a specific case. I don't know if you have any takes on that, about Final Fantasy 15. I have 2 theories after hearing your exposition about why this game did not reach the economic expectations of Square Enix, which might...
I'm sorry, I don't know it, so I don't have an idea.
Well, it was a game which was launched with a lot of a very big marketing strategy. And I thought it was like a genius idea. I thought it was going to be like a really, really big hit for Square Enix. They launched like a movie as a prequel. They launched a series of 5 anime chapters, so you could have like spin-offs surrounding the story. Yeah. And launch was a very big marketing strategy. They had like a lot of merch, a lot of activations. They even released like a mini game which was inside the game. So for me, it was a really, really big, expansive universe where you could have, movie series, games about the games, and then the game just flopped, like in terms of sales. For me, it was very, I really liked the game. I was very happy to play along and I was going to try the DLCs. But a lot of people were like enraged because they felt like they were forced to consume a lot of media. They were like, if I'm going to play the game, I just need to play the game. I don't need to have like a wiki on what happened 200 years before. I don't want to watch a movie. I don't want to. I don't even want to pay for DLCs. I want a full game, not a patched game. And that really, for me, it was very interesting because I was very happy to have like an expansion of the game. I don't know, I like a lot of the Witcher saga, and I'm happy to have a very, very big game and to be able to also read the literary materials from which it's based. And for me, it's a part of expanding my experience. The series, the Netflix series, is a little bit odd, and yeah, I know it's very different from the original.
No, I think it's a very good point. I think honestly, transmedia is overrated. You know, I think the main interest in making a game franchise is to make more games. And to build love for that game franchise. The point of having an IP is not to make a movie. The point of having an IP is to have a valuable game franchise. And you have to think of Fallout, for example, where they made a great TV series. The money coming from TV is nothing next to the money coming from the games. It's nothing. It's literally when a new TV season launches, you see a little bump on the sales of the game, and then it's back to normal.
Yeah.
You know, so you're building love, and the fans will love it even more, and it's strengthening the value of your IP, definitely. But the goal is not to make a movie. The goal is to make a strong game franchise. If somebody comes and begs you to make a movie, okay, maybe we'll do it. If you let us approve the scripts and the characters, then maybe we'll do it.
But after you have developed all of that, of course,
well, it's in the game. The characters are in the game.
This part or this plot will be perfect when we make the movie. You have to work your way to really develop your own IP, your own worlds, and your characters. And afterwards, if the market is receptive or if anyone is interested, then you will make the movie or the series.
Yeah, my personal advice is make sure that what is in the game can continue to the next game and DLCs and so on. Make sure it can work in a movie. If you have a character, then it can work in a movie. But leave it to the people who make movies. You know, I wouldn't spend a lot of time making plans on, after game 2, we're going to make a movie, and then we're going to have a DLC, and then we're going to make a TV series. That's just a waste of time. Concentrate on making games. That's what we do. But when Hollywood comes calling, we can say, well, yes, but we have to have approval rights, right? It's our character.
Sure.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been very enlightening. I think that tons of ideas and tons of
great.
Lots of information that
Well,
I think that every one of us can really meditate upon. I don't know if
Pablo just asked.
Yes.
Pablo just asked where he could reach me. I'll put my LinkedIn in the chat, so you're very welcome to reach out. And I've been talking to Francisco and Patricio about maybe doing some more things. So, maybe
hopefully,
we will.
Yes. It would be lovely. I think that we can start thinking of more opportunities so that we can meet more people from Mexico. And of course, there is some time difference, so we can figure out about the logistics. But hopefully, we can think of more opportunities to, collaborate, and so that we can meet more CEOs and creatives from Mexico as well. So I would like to ask everyone to please use the clap emoji reaction to give a big applause to our presenter who is taking time off from his vacation time to stick with us. So
thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
I'm really grateful for your time and for all the wisdom that you've shared with us. I think it's fantastic. And with this, I'm going to stop the recording, which